live. Everyone can no, I'll show the screen. Just a second. Let's offer our prayers. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirbhisesa Sunyavadi Paschat Desha Tarine Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Sorry. That's YouTube speaking, not me. Chapter 5, Lilamrita, Volume 1, The War. Under the circumstances since 1936 up to now, I was simply speculating whether I shall venture this difficult task, and that without any means and capacity. But as none have discouraged me, I have now taken courage to take up the work. Srila Prabhupada, back to Garden Magazine. Did you bring the pen? So this is what the whole circumstances. The fire in the matha broke out almost immediately. A senior disciple said that there should be one acharya who would be the spiritual successor to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and who would perform all initiations and settle all controversies. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had never said that. He had never called for one acharya. Rather, he had instructed the members of the Gaudiya Math to form a governing body of 12 men and carry on a concerted effort. But that instruction was abandoned, and the suggestion that there would be one leader took hold. A single person instead of 12 should take charge, and now it became a rush for who? Two parties contested. Ananta Vasudev, one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's leading preachers, was ambitious, and he pressed his claim with a group of influential sannyasi supporters. Another man, Kunja Bihari, shrewdly went after the properties. He had been a leading administrator under Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and now he claimed ownership of the palatial temple in Calcutta, as well as all the other properties and assets of the India-wide Gaudiya Math. Although in his will, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had expressed his desire that his disciples select a governing body to manage all properties and funds of the Gaudiya Math. Kunja Bihari contested the will's legitimacy. He and his supporters argued that since Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had received the properties on behalf of God, he was not their rightful owner and therefore could not determine their future ownership. Thus, he and the others disputed over the legal and theological aspects of the former acharya's position. What a situation! And this moment is supposed to be the purest moment. And on the same simultaneously, the Lord's illusory energy is so strong. Maya is called Lord's illusory energy is so strong. Even though they are close associates of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they were affected by Maya. So, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur predicted because of the behavior of the disciples, there is going to be fire. And after he leaves, it seems that whatever his will was written that it should be managed by the governing body commission, it didn't take place. And two disciples primarily, one disciple said that it should be managed by one person, one should initiate. It's called matadaksha. Matadaksha means, one archer for everybody. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did not do that. Other sampradayas, they did like similar things. But knowing well the situation, he didn't. He let people form a team of GBC and do it. But this is what happened. Kunja Vihari, who was managing the assets, he claimed the rightful honor. And at the same time, there's another one. What is that? The first one, Ananta Vasudev. He's leading preacher. He was very ambitious. He pressed that he, with a group of influencers, supporters, he wanted to be one of them. So in this way, there's a dispute, both legal and theological aspect. Because legal is because it's properties, and theological is whether there should be acharya, who should be acharya, and all these things. That's both theological aspect of it.
Shortly after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's passing away, litigation had begun. Ananta Vasudev, supported by a majority of the members of the Gaudiya Math, had claimed that he, as an ex-acharya, was the owner and director of the properties. But although Kunja Vihari had only a few supporters, he defied the majority by pressing his claim through lawyers in court. Kunja Vihari and his men had possession of the Chaitanya Math and had temples in Mayapur. Vasudev's party captured other buildings. Quarreling and fistfights broke out. The preaching of Gaudiya Math stopped. Abhay's inability to take part in the activities of the Gaudiya Math was suddenly in his favor. He had always been more a visitor than a member at the Math, and at least externally, more the Grihastha businessman than a missionary worker. This automatically put him at a distance from the fray. Of course, he was associated with the Mathas in Bombay and Allahabad, but he had no managerial position, no claims to ownership, and no role in the litigation. Nor did he desire to take sides in the struggle for power. Like many of the other disciples, he was mortified to see that his spiritual master's instructions for cooperation had been disregarded, and his mission thrown into a legal dispute. Abhay knew that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had wanted the leaders to work cooperatively, and so he could not sympathize with the warring factions. Both parties were an insult to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So in a summary, it explains how Ananta Vasudev, taking the position as the next Acharya, said that he was the next owner and he can claim all the properties. But Kunja Vihari had the support of lawyers in court, and both sides were trying to take the possession of all the buildings that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had established. And now it talks about how Abhay, now that he's not able to go to the Gaudiya Math, it's actually in his favor because now he doesn't have to get involved within the legal disputes between the two groups. And it says that these two groups are a big insult to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur.
Yeah.
But he wanted to preach, although becoming a very good English preacher was something he was meditating on more than actively doing. The Gaudiya Math would logically have been the vehicle for his preaching. He had already contributed articles to the Gaudiya Math's publications and had been working with his god brothers at the Allahabad and Bombay Center. Naturally, he thought of serving his spiritual master in terms of serving within his spiritual master's mission. But the Gaudiya Math, which had always been known for pure, bold preaching of the message of Lord Chaitanya, was now becoming known for embroiled factions. As the Gaudiya Math broke down, he was also affected under the present circumstances How could he carry out his spiritual master's order to preach? Previously, the main obstacle to his preaching had been family commitments, but now the obstacles were compounded. Now he had to wail helplessly for the outcome of his struggle. What would Krishna bring about?
Hmm. So, Prabhupada is, anyways, is new to this movement in the sense that, but he understands, but he was also impacted. He wanted to preach, he had immense contribution to the Harmonist, because Harmonist is the English magazine, Gaudiya Math's publication. And he was working with all God brothers. But what he said, as the Gaudiya Math broke down, he was also affected. In these circumstances, how he could carry a spiritual master's order to preach. Previously, the main obstacle was family. Family was the problem. Now here the organization. Anytime it is said that anytime an acharya leaves, there's a big disaster. We will cover later. ISKCON also had to go through so much of challenges. That's the nature of this material world. So yeah, Prasanthi, you can read.
His Bombay business diminishing, Abhay, now 42, moved back to Calcutta with his wife and family and rented a house at 6 Sita Kanja, Banjari Lane. The street was but a narrow lane, lined on either side with the three-story houses. His office was on the first floor, facing the street. The family lived upstairs. He rented the adjoining building, number 7, and on the first floor operated a small chemical laboratory manufacturing distilled water, D-Spain, liniment, Vimal tonic alpha, an injection for boils, and various other medicines. He also utilized a small outbuilding in the rear as part of his lab. Out front, he hung a large signboard, Abhay Charan D and Sons, displaying a picture of a mustached Abhay Charan. Sometimes he would employ 2 or 3 servants to assist him, but mostly he worked alone. And he would deliver his glass jugs of distilled water to agents such as Bengal Company and Goconet. He printed a brochure advertising D-Spain liniment, good for relieving gout, rheumatism, and all pains. And if one wanted to be free of recurring diseases like rheumatism and gout, Abbay's brochure directed that in addition to using D-Spain liniment, one refrain from alcohol and all sorts of drinking or intoxicating habits and food and drink should be very simple and innocent, such vegetables and milk. So Abhay moved to Calcutta with his family, and he set up his home and also his office in the same building, and also he set up a small chemical factory opposite in the same street. He was supplying various kinds of injections and also distilled water, and he has a big sign out of his outside of the building, and also he used to employ 2 or 3 servants to assist him, and he used to deliver whatever he was producing in his chemical factory, and he also recommended not to drink or intoxicate themselves and have good eating habits.
Thank you. So he's back to again in a simple small business, because failed both sides in the sense that yes, Cyclone, you can go.
The new Calcutta business enjoyed an early success, but Abhay didn't have his heart in it. It was a duty. He had to do it to maintain his family. His new acquaintances in Calcutta found him to be a devotee of God at heart. a businessman, a family man, but more concerned with writing and preaching than with business and family. Chandi Mukherjee, a neighbor from nearby Bihari Street, he was interested only in devotional activities, and he did his business only to maintain the family. He didn't seem interested in the profit motive, in accumulating money or becoming a rich man. Charan Mukherjee, Abey's next door neighbor, Abey Charan De, was always a very patient listener to every illogical argument that anybody, including myself, would bring to him. Not knowing philosophy, I would illogically present so many arguments, and Mr. Day would always very patiently listen. Nothing agitated him. He was always very calm, and he taught me about God. He would speak only of Krishna. He was translating the Gita and was maintaining his business. So here we read about the new business that Abey started in Calcutta. It was an early success, but Abey did not have his complete interest in it. He did this only to maintain his family, and he wanted to, he was more concerned about writing and preaching than his new business that he started. We also hear about two neighbors, Chandi Mukherjee and Charan Mukherjee, what they spoke about Abey Charan, like confirming that he was only interested in devotional activities, and he did this business only to maintain his family. He was not interested in making money or becoming rich. And sometimes his neighbor Charan Mukherjee would ask him all questions, illogical questions, and Charan would just listen him, and he would not get agitated. And he was also translating the Gita at this time, and whenever he would speak only of Krishna.
It's a big transformation happened. See, earlier he was a little ambitious. Now he's all material desires is gone after spiritual initiation, everything. Mataji, go ahead.
Neighbors would often see him sitting on his cot in the front room. He would read his spiritual master's books and sometimes recite the Sanskrit slokas out loud. He liked to discuss philosophy with anyone who came by. His family keeping mostly upstairs, Abhay would sit alone in the downstairs front room, dressed in dhoti and kurta, or sometimes a dhoti and only a vest. Often he would be at his writing, while outside the door his children played with the children of the Ganguly family who lived in the rare apartment of the same building. The neighbors lived openly in a kind of joint neighborhood family, and Abhay talked freely. Abhay talked freely with the other neighbors, but of Vaishnava philosophy and only rarely of business. Mr. Ganguly found Abhay's speech scholastic and always very philosophical. Abhay was absorbed in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and even in brief conversations, he would refer to Lord Krishna and to Bhagavad Gita's description of Lord Krishna as the basis of both the material and spiritual worlds. While working in his laboratory or receiving a delivery of empty bottles from the Muslim bottle merchant, or going out to sell his medicine, he would be talking or thinking about God. He always sits downstairs in a room by writing books, and his children and the children of Ganguly family played together, and his family, while sitting upstairs also, he used to sit downstairs and write books. And that's it I know.
Yeah, yes, sure. Basically, what happened is he's tried to develop, isolation. He didn't have, because he didn't have much interest now in the material life. So he was focusing only anything related to Krishna, that is interest, only for the sake of whatever needs to be done. Family, stayed upstairs and children played there, and he was busy with his own and always desiring to discuss about Krishna Katha. That is, yeah. Nikunj Mataji, you can read.
In those days, for a person in Calcutta to be interested in God consciousness was not so unusual. Abai found even a man like Abdullah, the Muslim bottle merchant, to be very religious. One day, Abai asked Abdullah, who had once been very poor but had become rich by his business, now you have got money, so how are you going to use your money? The bottle merchant replied, my dear sir, I have an intention to construct a mosque. Meanwhile, the war of the Gaudiya Math raged on. Both factions were ill motivated and both deviated from the instructions of their spiritual master. The very act of trying to determine ownership of the properties through legal action meant that the godbrothers were disobeying the express desire of their spiritual master, as stated in his will. The litigation continued year after year, but the legal wranglings could not bring them together or purify them. One court ruled a favor to Ananta Vasudeva, and then a higher court awarded 2/3 of the Mata's property to Kunjavihari and 1/3 to Vasudeva. Still, although Vasudeva had fewer properties, he inspired more followers. He seemed to them more intent on reviving the preaching of the Gaudiya Math. But when Vasudeva subsequently fell down from the principles of sannyasa by going off with a woman, the groups broke further to pieces. So here it is said, for any person during that time in Calcutta, to be God consciousness is usual, meaning, like, even the Muslim bottle merchant like Abdullah, when Mr. Abai asked him, what would you do with all the money you earned? He even said he wants to construct a mosque. While this is happening, the Gaudiya Math was continued to have all the issues and regarding their ownership of the properties. So they were going through the court, even though the court couldn't do a proper couldn't solve the battle between them. One of the court ruled in the favor of Anant Vasudev, and the other higher court awarded like 2/3 of the Gaudiya Math's property to Kunjavihari and 1/3 to the Vasudev. Even though Anant Vasudev had a lot of followers who were inspired by him, later on, as he fell down from the principles of sannyasa, that broke into pieces.
And then he fell down, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it's going with a human, because what can you do? Again, Punar Mushikaba again become mouse. That's the problem. Oh, I'm sorry. Annath, you can read.
Yes, Prabhu. Most of the sannyasis continue to maintain their principles, but many now left the jurisdiction of the two contending factions in disgust. Individuals form their own ashramas, Gaudiya Mission, Chaitanya Gaudiya Math, and others. The unified entity of Gaudiya Math as an all-India mission consisting of many temples, several presses, and hundreds of devotees working cooperatively under one leadership ceased to exist. God brothers continued to uphold the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as they had received them from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, but because they were meant to work together, they lacked their former united potency. Illusions of proprietorship and prestige had superseded the spiritual master's order and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's cause, a worldwide movement for propagating Lord Chaitanya's teachings collapsed. Wherever Abhay went, he seemed to attract the company of his god brothers, some followers of Sridhara Maharaja, the same Sridhara with whom he had worked in Bombay and whom he had always regarded as a good devotee and scholar, met Abhay at his place on Banerjee Lane and told this news to Sridhar Maharaja, who was then living at his own ashram in Mayapur. Sridhar Maharaj had disaffiliated himself from the factions of the Gaudiya Math, but as a sannyasi, he was still preaching and was interested in publishing Vaishnava literature. He had wanted to maintain an ashrama in Calcutta, so for 20 rupees a month, he rented from Abhay the 4 rooms on the second floor of number 7, Abhay above Abhay's chemical laboratory. So, the first paragraph is primarily talking about, how things started downhill, spiraling down with, um, the two separated groups and everybody trying to do their own thing. And, everything pretty much was under one umbrella, one leadership. Everything started to kind of collapse, and everybody was trying to do their own thing. And as we read here, when everybody works together as a team, then that potency is more powerful than individuals doing their own thing. So, and ego and proprietorship took over the instructions and the higher cause that Bhaktisiddhanta had laid out for teaching Lord Chaitanya's, for Lord Chaitanya's teachings, and the whole thing collapsed. And here, the next paragraph, we were reading about how his god brothers, Abhay's god brothers, were seemed to be attracted to Abhay and met him at his place, and they informed Sridhar Maharaja, who was in Mayapur at that time. And Sridhar Maharaj had, disassociated or disaffiliated himself from the Gaudiya Math, but he was still, preaching and interested in publishing, and he rented, the 4 rooms above Abhay's company on the second floor.
Nice. I went to last time when we went to California, we went to Sridhar Maharaj, also one ashram in San Francisco, near San Francisco, like to the outskirts. And some of the Prabhupada's disciples also were found there. And then that's new. Later, probably something will come on that.
Oh, nice.
Mataji is going to read.
Yes.
She's
Yeah,
there.
Prabhu. I'm here, Prabhu. Thank you. Now, whenever they came to Calcutta, Sridhar Maharaja, Puri Maharaja, and Bhakti Saranga Maharaja based themselves there, staying in small separate rooms. It became a regular ashrama for sannyasis and brahmacharis, and Sridhar Maharaja put a sign out front, Devananda Saraswati Math. Sridhar Maharaja's establishment of the Math in Mayapur with a branch in Calcutta was his response to the Gaudiya Math split. Like other sannyasis, he had been initiating disciples and preaching, not waiting for the outcome of the litigation, with its continued appeals and counterclaims. Abhay was glad to encourage Sridhar Maharaja and others who joined him at his little ashrama. Here, Abhay and Sridhar Maharaja and his followers could remain aloof from the varying factions and together pursue their plans for spreading Krishna consciousness. The sannyasis cooked in their separate kitchen, performed their puja, and held morning and evening kirtanas and lectures. Abhay remained with his family, taking his own meals and performing his own puja. But he often went to discuss Srimad Bhagavatam with Sridhar Maharaj. From his roof, Abhay could see the towering steeple of his spiritual master's building, the Gaudiya Math of Bhag Bazar, its ownership now contested by bitter factions. So, continuing from the previous paragraph about Sridhar Maharaja, and the first paragraph explains about the establishment of Devananda Saraswati Math, which includes Sridhar Maharaja, Puri Maharaja, and Bhakti Saranga Maharaja. It is getting together of all who were having similar thinking, and then they have their name for that. And it also explains how they were performing their puja and kirtans and everything separately because they are sannyasis. Since Prabhupada was still with the family at that time, he didn't go and join them or anything, even though they were, staying right above. He had his own kitchen. He was doing his own puja and kirtan, but he would go and discuss Bhagavatam with Sridhar Maharaja. And he could, the last line here, it says that Prabhupada could still see his spiritual master with the Gaudiya Math's tower. That kind of shows that he still has those memories in him, and he's moving, how he was moving, and also, again, with his goal in his heart, he was moving, carrying all those impressions from his Guru Maharaj.
Yeah, just like most of the time, parents know more than children break. So it's the same. So Puri Maharaj is from Orissa, the one who left the planet last among his god brothers. So everybody had their own foundations or organizations registered. No one could work under the same. AJ, please.
Abhay would often accompany Sridhara Maharaja and his assistants at preaching programs, where he'd play the mridanga. And when Sridhara Maharaj fell ill, Abhay led the other devotees on preaching engagements, performing kirtan, playing mridanga, and giving lectures on the Bhagavatam. Sridhara Maharaj said, "We did not see Abhay as working very hard for making money, nor did he seem very rich or to have a lot of liquid funds. He was attracted more to the spiritual side of affairs than his own family affairs. He never discussed business prospects with me, whether the business was up or down, or whether he was planning to do this or that. Monetarily, he did not have sufficient funds for giving any to the mission." Read the next one, yeah? Or
it's up to you.
All right. Okay. Abhay began to think seriously about writing Vaishnava literature. His spiritual master had seemed very pleased and had told the editor of The Harmonist, "Whatever he writes, publish it." Business profits, if he could somehow expand them, could go for printing books in English, as his spiritual master had said. "If you ever get money, print books." Certainly, the Gaudiya Math was not going to do it. Kunja Vihari had sold Bhakti Siddhanta's printing presses to offset his legal expenses. No, Abhay would have to continue on his own, maintaining his business and simultaneously trying to write and publish. And that was also the prescription of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta. "It is better that he is living outside your company. When the time comes, he will do everything himself." So those three, kind of just talk about his expanding role, right? As he began to accompany Sridhara Maharaj when he would go to preach, and sometimes when Sridhara Maharaj was ill, Prabhupada would step in and do some of the preaching as well as lead kirtan and along with the other devotees. And it then talks about, Sridhara Maharaj kind of goes in and says that Abai was, he could tell he wasn't focusing on business anymore, right? That he wasn't trying hard to make money. He didn't have enough to really do anything in order to make donations or anything like that. So he was kind of more just taking care of the base minimum he needed to survive, it sounds like. And then as the last paragraph there talks about, when Abai began to realize he should start writing, because that's what Bhaktisiddhanta had told him to do, start writing in English and get it printed. But since Kunja Vihari had sold off all the presses, he would have to fund everything himself. So, he was trying to figure out how the best way to do that, because he realized that's what his mission was.
Interesting. Kunja Vihari sold the printing press.
It's wild, right?
Whatever the spiritual masters, that's the priority, and that's sold. Rather than selling the property, sold the printing press.
It's crazy to see how easily money corrupts. Right?
Yeah.
Even amongst, who you think are spiritual devout, they are devout spiritually rather. As soon as this guy had his chance to get his hands on some property and some money, he went in full force, it seems.
That's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, "Na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim." Sannyasi, these all should not handle na dhanam, money, women, and all this thing. But that's why illusory energy is so strong that big people can collapse. But thank you. So it's now it helped Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's prescription there. That it's better that he lives outside of your company. When time comes, he will do everything. Wow, it's a big thing for him. What is it? Srikar, please.
It was in 1939 that Abhay wrote Introduction to Gita Upanishad. It was a short piece, but it signaled his intention to take on the task of one day translating Bhagavad Gita into English with commentary. Of course, there were already many commentaries in English, but most of them had been written by impersonalists or others who had not delivered the original spirit of Gita, the spirit of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, hearing Bhagavad Gita directly from Lord Krishna. Abhay knew, however, that he could present Bhagavad Gita in the proper spirit by writing an English commentary based on teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the disciplic succession. So he began. Whenever he could make time, he would write. Although a strict grammarian could find fault in his English composition, his meaning was always clear. In his introduction, Abhay reflected on the time when, as a young schoolboy, he had attended a lecture, Vidya Ratna, the jewel of education. The theme of the lecture had been that God does not exist and could not exist. If there were God, he would certainly have appeared on earth to put an end to all religious rivalry. But since God had not obliged man in this way, we should banish all thought of his existence from our minds. The audience, Abhay explained, consisting only of so many young boys, did not delve deeply into the subject matter of the lecture. Yet the majority, impressed by the arguments, carried away lofty ideas of godlessness and thus became agnostic at home. So in summary, here we see that in the year 1939, Srila Prabhupada started writing the introduction to Gita Upanishad. So writing this introduction, it signaled his intention to take on the task of one day translating the Bhagavad Gita. So in those days, there were many commentaries of Bhagavad Gita that were already available in the market, but most of them were commentaries by impersonalists. So then, but Prabhupada Abhay knew that he could present Bhagavad Gita as it is in the proper spirit. So whenever he found time, he started writing the purpose. So although English, the language wise, even a strict grammarian could find faults in his English composition, but still the meaning was very clear. Whatever he had written, the meaning was very clear. So in the introduction of Gita Upanishad, like just mentioned that Prabhupada reflected on a time when he attended a lecture when he was a schoolboy. And then the lecture was like Vidya Ratna. The theme of the lecture was that the God does not exist and could not exist. And then here it is mentioned that there were many young people in the audience who attended that lecture who did not pay much attention to the details of it, but they were so much influenced by whatever was presented in that lecture. Like, and they were carried away with the lofty ideas of godlessness and became very agnostic at home.
Yeah, that's also, whatever the majority goes nowadays,
Yeah.
like democracy. Yes, go ahead. Sridhar.
Abhay had not been satisfied with the agnostic conclusion because I had been trained by my father to be engaged in the worship of Sri Sri Radha Govinda. But as a result of the Vidyaratna lecture, I was experiencing some mental conflict between agnosticism and the existence of Godhead. Later, having heard from his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Abhay understood that the personality of Godhead exists in every sphere of activity. But we do not have the eyes to see him. Abhay wrote, even if the Lord personally manifests himself on earth, the quarreling mundaners will not stop their fighting and look upon Godhead or his representative due to ignorance. This is the birthright of the individual soul by the grace of God. Bhagavad Gita is the true jewel of education. And in the Gita, Lord Krishna declares to the fighting people on earth, here I am, do not quarrel. The agnostic who had spoken of the jewel of education had been blinded by the jewel and therefore could not see and appreciate the personality of Godhead. Thus, he had gone on to convince others to become so called jewels also. So, here he is not satisfied with the agnostic conclusion because his father used to train him to worship Sri Sri Radha Govinda, and he was even having some mental conflict between this agnosticism and the existence of Godhead. But by hearing his spiritual master, he understood that God exists everywhere in the activity, but because of the quarreling mundaners, we cannot see the God with our eyes. But and even due to ignorance, we cannot even see the God.
It says even if the Lord personally comes, still one cannot see because of their ignorance. One has to know first. That's why one has to hear the authorities.
So here is telling that Bhagavad Gita is the jewel of education. And the agnostic who had spoken of the jewel of education. So here he is giving the example of Bhagavad Gita, like of an agnostic, that though he is saying that Bhagavad Gita is the jewel of education, he is actually being blinded by the jewel. So he cannot see the personality of Godhead, and even he cannot appreciate it. So Abhay had gone to convince others to become the so-called jewels.
Right. So that's why people want Bhagavad Gita, but not Krishna. Many times they are not interested in Krishna. Many times. Yes, Swati Mataji.
Following his spiritual master, Abhay displayed an aggressive spirit for confronting all the opponents of pure theism. In responding to his spiritual master orders to develop into an English preacher, Abhay was not simply making neutral scholarly presentations. He was willing and reading to fight, whether against modern agonist or Vaishnavism, old traditional enemy, Mayavada impersonalism. Although few scholars thought the way of surrendering to Lord Krishna as espoused in Bhagavad Gita Almost all respected Bhagavad Gita as presenting the essence of all knowledge. The Gita, therefore, was the perfect vehicle for confronting those who misrespected God and religion. The Gita was a challenge to agnostic, um, apotheistic, anthropomorphist,
Anthropomorphist.
impersonalist, hentoist, pantheist, and absolute monist. Although there were already more than 600 commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, they have been written by person with an inner hatred for the personality of Godhead, and therefore they were imperfect. Such envious person, Abhay wrote, he is not at an um, entrance into the real meaning of Bhagavad Gita, in as much as fly cannot enter into the covered jar of honey. So, in this paragraph, Abhay was just following his spiritual master to preach, especially the spiritual knowledge in English. Not just preaching, not just basics preaching. He's preparing by himself in such a way so that he can fight and he can prove the point of Bhagavad Gita. Where especially with Mayavadis and impersonalism. And
So basically, he created now that after under the direction of his spiritual master, he had to challenge all these people, and so many volume commentaries they've written hundreds of volume, but no one actually presented Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. So it means because of our enviousness, eternal in this material world, they wanted to take the credit. So an inner hatred for the personality of Godhead, therefore they were imperfect. Such envious persons, our road, have no entrance to the real, because they were writing in that mood, not following the authority, parampara, and pure devotional service. So they cannot understand the purpose Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says that. Now I will Naham Prakasa Sarvasya Yoga Mayasamamite. I will not reveal everybody unless one surrenders to me. Thank you. Vijayanand Prabhu.
Abhay described Indian culture as an almost impassable ocean due to its depth of thought and apparent mixtures of conclusions. But in this book, Abhay declared, I will establish that Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead by referring to the available records of scriptures, which are the recorded history of Indian culture and thought. The sannyasis at 7 Banerjee Lane were impressed by the scope of Abhay's thought and intentions. As it was a customary to award a title to an especially worthy Vaishnava according to his qualities, Bhakti Saranga Goswami wanted to confer upon Abhay the title Bhakti Siddhanta. Sridhara Maharaja, however, thought it inappropriate to give Abhay the same title as their spiritual master, and he asked that Abhay's title can be changed to Bhakti Vedanta. Bhakti meaning devotion and Vedanta meaning the end of knowledge. Abhay was grateful. The title combined the devotion of religion with the scholarship of most rigorous philosophy as passed on by the scholarly followers of Lord Chaitanya. He appreciated the sincere gesture of God brothers and accepted the title as a further commitment to his spiritual path of preaching Krishna consciousness. Okay, so here we are seeing how Abhay is like portraying how like the portraying the importance of the personality of God. Like basically, he was saying he's saying like Krishna is the absolute personality of God, and so this kind of portraying, and also he mentions about the like the Indian culture and the thought, in the history of Indian culture and the thought, he was portraying like Krishna's absolute personality of God, and the sannyasis at the 7 Banerjee Lane were also impressed of Abhay's thought, and they were like discussing to give a title to respect and to award a title according to his qualities. And initially they were discussing and they were thinking to give a title like to Abe like Bhakti Siddhanta. However, Sridhar Maharaja thought it is inappropriate to give Abe the same title which is given to his spiritual master. So then they came up with giving Bhakti Vedanta. And Bhakti Vedanta means like end of knowledge and spiritual actually. And Abe was very happy with the title, and he was like he appreciated the gesture of his god brothers, and he accepted the title as a further commitment to the preaching Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, I was happy in the sense that in his to pursue his spiritual master's direction. So Bhakti Vedanta means the one who has attained understood the conclusions of the Vedas. Bhakti Vedanta as devotional service is very good. You know, they consider that not to give Bhakti Siddhanta. Even there was a lot of fire later when he was called Prabhupada. You know, we will see. So now at least he got Bhakti Vedanta. So here we see the Avaya Charanarvinda Bhakti Vedanta. Then later he'll become Swami. I think, did I miss anyone? Did I miss anyone? No, right? Okay, I will read maybe. Avaya continued regularly associating with Sridhar Maharaj and discussing with him Srimad Bhagavatam. Avaya encouraged him to preach widely. Although Sridhar Maharaj was admittedly more the scholar and rather shy about going out and preaching. On several occasions, Avaya tried to convince Sridhar Maharaj to go with him and charge Gandhi and Nehru as to why they weren't following the principles of Bhagavad Gita. Another fruit of the spiritual association at 7 Banerjee Lane was a book called Prapanna Jivanamrita, compiled by Sridhar Maharaj, a collection of verses from various Vaishnava scriptures, including excerpts from the works of Rupa Goswami. It was divided into 6 chapters according to the 6 divisions of the surrender. Avaya, along with the sannyasis of the Devanand Saraswati Math, financed the publication. Thus, it was published as a joint effort by friends. So that looks like Sridhar Maharaj has been a long time in a companion of Prabhupada. He knew a lot of philosophy, nice, but he was shy. He wouldn't present to Prabhupada. He used to insist, go, but let's go and charge Gandhi and Nehru also. But I think this didn't happen. Sridhar Maharaj compiled the book Prapanna Jivanamrita, which is by Sridhar Maharaj, which explains the 6 divisions of surrender. I think it's a Saranagati, right? Dainya, Atma Nivedana, those things. Avaya, along the sannyasis of the Devanand Saraswati finance, finance that the book publication. Are you going to read?
September 3rd, 1939. Lord Linlithgow, Viceroy of India, announced that India was at war with Germany. Thus, England swept India into the war without consulting any Indians. Although independence-minded, India certainly resented such a show of foreign control. There were mixed feelings about the war. India wanted independence, that she sympathized with the Allied cause against fascism in the West and feared an invasion by Imperial Japan in the East. Since she disliked the British so violently, one author asked a typical New Delhi student of the day, "Would you want Japan to invade and conquer India?" Student: "No, but we Indians pray that God may give the British enough strength to stand up under the blows they deserve." Although at the outbreak of war, India had only 175,000 men in her armed forces, the British managed to increase the number of Indian soldiers to 2 million. There's no draft, but the British sent recruiting agents all over India, especially in the Punjab, where military service seemed an attractive offer to the local poor. The Punjabis proved great fighters, whereas Bengalis enlisted as officers, doctors, contractors, and clerks. Indian soldiers were dispatched to battlefields in Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Persia, Malaya, Burma, and Assam. So, in summary, says how England swept India into war without telling them. But even though India disliked England, they would rather have England beat Japan, as the student says, that even they deserve what pain, but let them have enough power to stand up to it. And in the beginning, India only had 175,000 men, but that number increased by 2 million, and many of them were Punjabis because they were good warriors. And these soldiers were dispatched all over to like Egypt, Iraq, Syria, etc.
While the British were attempting to mobilize Indians for the war, the Indian nationalist movement, which had continued off and on for more than 20 years, became very active. Members of the Congress party refused to cooperate with the war effort and demanded guaranteed independence for India. Some thought that since England had her hands full with Germany, the time was ripe to revolt and gain independence by force. Gandhi's position had been one of unconditional pacifism, and he had opposed the idea of Indians taking up arms, even to defend India. But by 1942, he had become more inimical and had reduced his policy towards the British to a simple, unequivocal quit India. Thousands of Indians responded by chanting slogans in the street and even by tearing up the railway lines.
Yeah. So, so here it says that the Congress party refused to cooperate with the war. This all politics is going on that time. That time I believe there's only one party, right, who was fighting for India independence. So some thought that England had, England had her hands with the full with the Germany, so they wanted to kind of negotiate. So so in return, they should release India. But Gandhi in 1942 had come his policy has changed. He wanted to do Quit India movement, and thousands of Indians responded to that for the British to quit, to leave India. Actually, I don't know much about this politics, but I'm just sharing what was the fighting. Okay, we can have one more person read. Prasad, you can read.
Abhay's militant former schoolmate, Subhash Chandra Bose, fought against the British in his own way. He had approached Hitler in Germany and gotten him to agree that when the Germans captured Indian soldiers, Germany would return them to Bose, who would maintain them in his nationalist army. With this army, Bose planned to return to India and drive the British from Indian soil. But dissatisfied with his progress in Germany, Bose made a similar arrangement with Tojo in Japan, and soon thousands of Gurkhas and Sikhs, the best fighters in the Indian army, had defected from the British army to join Bose freedom fighters in Singapore. Bose began to prepare his army to invade India from the north. Then, in 1943, the British found that the Japanese, who had already taken Burma, were at the doors of India, approaching Bengal. By their tactic known as the denial policy, the British sank many Indian boats carrying food and destroyed large rice crops, fearing that they would fall into the hands of the enemy. This left local Indians starving and without the boats they needed for trade. The famine then ensured that the worst had hit Bengal in 150 years. The government moved all control of food costs, and those who could not afford to buy at the skyrocketing prices died in the streets of Calcutta. So we see that people are planning how to win the war against each other. And Subhash Chandra Bose, former classmate of Abhay, he devised a plan. He made an agreement with Germans and also to Japan. Whenever you capture Indian soldiers from British Army, you give them to me so that I can go back and fight against British. So he did not make much progress with Germany. So he made a pact with Japan. And then he was able to get thousands of Indian soldiers, Gurkhas and Sikhs. And he prepared to invade India from north. And then British devised a plan of sinking boats carrying food and destroyed large rice crops because it doesn't want to get this food get this food into the hands of the enemy. So they don't want the enemy having this food. So they destroyed. In turn, the locals suffered, and there was a famine. It's worst in 150 years, and many people suffered, and the prices skyrocketed, and all this due to the tactics of the British.
Yeah, it's interesting. By the tactic known as the denial policy, the British sank many Indian boats carrying food and destroyed large rice crops. They were carrying food for whom? I didn't understand this.
Food for India.
Just food, yeah, just supplies for India in general, but they'd rather the Indians starve than the Japanese prosper, was the idea. So
if they starve, Japanese will prosper?
yeah, they're saying if they sink those boats, the Japanese soldiers can't take the food for themselves. So it's like you'll see like...
Oh, right. Japanese will, exactly, yeah. So they will come in to take the food. That's why I was...
like in movies where you'll see like they'll burn the village before they leave it. It's so the enemy can't come in and take advantage of things that are left there. They'll burn the crops, they'll burn the buildings. They don't want to leave anything for the next guy that's coming in. It's the same idea. If we sink the boats with the food, then the Japanese can't capture those boats and have the food. So it's a terrible thing to do.
Oh, is it? Yeah, it's good to know. I can understand. And that impacted Bengal, not only Bengal, I think India, so much. Famine there.
And the Bengal was hit by a famine.
Yeah. It's a very prosperous place. Very nice. Any any quick reflections? Any how anyone liked? So we go with the same speed. Today's chapter we begin with the fight, the war, and we primarily saw that the divisions, the breaking of the Gaudiya Math established by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. As soon as it disappeared, there's a fight for possessions, and between at least primarily two, and eventually divided and destroyed. The printing press is sold, and finally the sannyasi fell down. Prabhupada had no way, he could not do much. He moved to Calcutta. Then he started his own business again with distilled water and all this thing. But he's a transformed person now, but without much facility for preaching. But he tried his own. He gave upper floor to Sridhar Swami, looks like is his friend always, and they continued a small ashram. Prabhupada started writing book. I'm translating Bhagavad Gita, Gita Upanishad, right? And everybody's very impressed. He got the title of Bhakti Vedanta. That's great. And now it comes the war situation, what happened with Subhash Chandra Bose, how he worked with his tactic. So that's it. I think that's it. I want to thank you. Anyone has any questions or comments we read, or so we finish? Okay. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. We'll meet again tomorrow. Okay. Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you.